is Cindy Berryman-Fink, and she has been a Weaverville resident for the past 12 years, and she's retired as a communications professor at the University of Cincinnati, and she's been doing storytelling for the last few years at the request of her talented husband, who will also be a teller tonight. And Cindy is going to start and surprise us with a pretty exciting story. So welcome, Cindy.
Thank you. Thank you. I am a crazy pet lover. I'm not a lover of crazy pets, but I'm a crazy lover of all pets. And it started when I was a kid. I grew up in an old blue-collar textile manufacturing city of Fall River, Massachusetts. And we lived in the second story of a three-story house that we called the tenement house. And one day, Mom came home from work carrying a small corrugated cardboard box, and there was something moving inside. She brought home a puppy for me. It was tiny, it was black, silky, long black fur. I named him Mike, my first dog ever. Now, this was the 1950s, late 1950s, and this was long before dogs had their own clothes, their own rooms, their own strollers, their own chiropractors. Many of you might remember that dogs could roam the neighborhood at will. So the dog needed to go out to do business. You open the door, you take them down the flight of stairs, they go out for the day, come back when they're hungry. Well, one day, Mike disappeared. And there I am, 7 years old or so. I'm wandering the streets of the city, wandering the sidewalks, yelling, "Mike! Mike, where are you? Mike, come home!" Well, Mike never came home. A few weeks or so later, I overhear my dad. He's reading the newspaper, and he says to my mom, "Hey, good. It says here that there's dog snatchers selling dogs to Harvard Medical School." I would lay awake at night envisioning Mike alive on a table with white-coated Harvard researchers working on him, experimenting on him. So I guess I learned at a young age that being a crazy pet lover can bring pain as well as joy. And then a few years after that, we moved to the town next door, which was totally opposite. It was a town called Westport, Massachusetts, 7,000 people back then, lobster fishing, dairy farming community. And there we had a white farmhouse, not a farm, just a farmhouse, and about an acre of land. And one day I go into the yard and I look into the field next to our house with the New England stone wall, look at the field, and there is a black Angus bull. Well, I'm 10 years old, I'm still a crazy pet lover. I've got a new friend. I run into the house and I say, "Mom, Dad, there's a bull in the field, come see." So they come out and they look over the wall and they say to me, "Don't go near him. He's dangerous and he could kill you." Well, that didn't stop me. I named him Harry. And basically, Harry was kind of boring because all he would do is walk the field all day to head down, munching grass. But I soon learned to pick leaves from the tree in my yard and sit on the wall offering him leaves. And he'd be way off in the field. I'd yell, "Harry, Harry, got some yummy leaves for you." He'd come running and he'd eat the leaves. And it wasn't very long before the minute I come out of the house, he'd come to the edge of the wall waiting for the leaves. And he was big. I mean, he was 1,200 pounds, black, big eyes. And he would let me, I'd sit on the wall. I knew not to get in the field with him, but I'd sit on the wall, and he'd let me scratch behind his ear. And he'd lean into it, you know, the way a dog will when you scratch behind the ear. And he'd take the leaves from my hands. And I loved looking into his big eyes, and he has these big, long eyelashes. Now, we had learned that he was in the field because he was a 4-H project for Russell Vincelette, the teenager that lived down the road. So Harry was my friend a year or more or so, and one day I go out in the field, Harry's not there. I go in the house and I tell my parents, Harry's not there. They're like, oh, we don't know. A few days later, Mrs. Vincelette comes to the house with 2 pounds of ground beef. My parents made burgers. They're eating the burgers going, oh, yum, oh, this is the best ground beef we've ever had. You can't buy this at the A&P. And I'm sitting there quietly sobbing into my Chef Boyardee SpaghettiOs. Now, my parents weren't mean. I'm kind of pointing them out kind of mean here, but they were just these practical New Englanders, you know? You hear that there's dog snatchers, you say there's dog snatchers. You get the ground beef, it's better than the A&P, you eat it, you know? So I learned at age 10 to not make pets of the livestock. So let's fast forward now about past 31 years. So Chuck and I spent 31 years together in Cincinnati, raising a couple of sons. And we had lots of dogs and cats. Our first dog, it was Chuck's first dog ever. We went to the pound, the animal rescue, and he picked out a tiny little white and brown pit bull mix. And he was so funny. He's going around saying, he was 30, you were 30, I think. This is my first dog, I got a puppy, it's my first dog. He named him Pita, P-I-T-A, for pain in the ass. And the dog lived up to the name. Pita's claim to fame was her strength, pit bull, and determination. One day we tied her to a small tree in the backyard. We went off to work. We come home at the end of the day. She's roaming the neighborhood, carrying the uprooted tree behind her around the neighborhood. Then we also had, we have a couple of labs, but we had a Labrador retrievers. We had a black lab named Bubba. And our family was vacationing at a lake in Kentucky one time, and Bubba, of course, being a lab, loves to swim, so was out swimming and went around the bend and disappeared, was gone a long time. We were getting very worried. Where's Bubba? Where's Bubba? Finally, Bubba comes swimming back, pushing with her nose a floating telephone pole. Now, Chuck and I decided to retire young. I had been a professor at the University of Cincinnati. I was 56 when we retired. He was 58, and we decided to move to Asheville. And when I saw what a crazy pet-loving city Asheville and Greater Asheville is, I created a website, I printed up business cards, I went and I bought a couple of cases of those thin blue plastic poop bags, and I started a business called Pet Care Extraordinaire. So that was very different from my previous career. As a pet sitter, I'm no longer the professor, donning skirted suits with crisp white blouses and high heels and didn't have to wear mascara or lipstick. I was no longer lecturing to freshmen or reading students' papers. Rather than grading master's theses, I was now picking up dog feces. And I loved it. I love it. Spend my time running through open fields with dogs or playing with cats or kittens in my lap. I don't stay overnight anymore, but I used to stay overnight at people's houses, and many a cold winter night I'd be sleeping with a big old hound dog cozied up against me, keeping me warm. So I then was this crazy pet lover was now being paid to love other people's pets. What a deal. But just like with Mike and Harry, there have been some disasters. The first disaster was Iggy. I show up for my intake appointment and I knock at the door and a little 6-year-old boy comes and says, "Hi, come on in." And his mother's behind him. He takes me into the living room and points to a big glass sort of aquarium-like cage and says, this is Iggy. Iggy's from Mexico, and Iggy's 12 years old. There in the glass aquarium is a 4-foot-long iguana with this oversized head, this long body, and a tip of a tail. And it was a grayish green, slimy looking big thing. And it had these comb-like spikes on its back and bulging eyes on either side of the head. If you've ever seen an iguana, the eyes are at front, either side of the head. And it had these razor sharp looking teeth. So the mom explained all I'd have to do on every other day visit is feed Iggy about a dozen live crickets. And she kept the crickets in a mason jar in the kitchen. And on every visit, I was to take a handful of this cricket chow, kind of like a wheat bran looking stuff, and put it in the jar so the crickets could eat it and multiply, and give Iggy on a little measuring cup, 1/8 of a cup, his 12 crickets. Yeah, a piece of cake. I hadn't been big on reptiles. We'd never owned reptiles, but you know, how hard could this be to do this every other day? So I get there at my first visit, and I'm in the kitchen, and I unscrew the lid, and I turn to get the, unscrew the lid of the crickets, and I turn to get the measuring cup, and within seconds, you know, all the crickets have hopped out of the jar. Within seconds, they are everywhere. They're in the living room, they're under the couch, they're on the table, they're crawling up the walls. And there's Iggy. He hasn't eaten in 2 days now. And he sees and hears crickets everywhere. The cricket noise was deafening. He's banging himself against the glass aquarium. He's going left, right, up and down. His tail is hitting. So I go to the kitchen and I get a coffee mug and I go around the house trying to scoop up as many crickets as I can. I get some, and I put it in the mason jar, and I put the cricket chow in, and I feed him his 12 crickets. And I do this, you know, every other day for a week, week and a half or so. And so Iggy survived. He survived the week and a half in my pet care. But every time I went in that house, and I'm sure when the people came back after their vacation, you could hear that faint sound of crickets all over the house. Let's see, my next catastrophe is Big Louie. I walked a dog named Big Louie 5 days a week for many, many years. And Big Louie lived in North Asheville, and there were sidewalks everywhere. And now Big Louie is a bull mastiff. If you know bull mastiffs, 140 pounds. I weigh 115. When Louie would be standing, his head would come almost up to my shoulder. I had a harness I put on Big Louie, and I had control of him. And as I say, I walked him 5 days a week for years. I had control of him because I would keep treats in my pocket, and as we're walking, I would scan the landscape to see if there was a squirrel or a bird or a cat or anything. And if there was, I'd make him sit, face me, and I'd hold up the treat, and he would be focused on me, and I would do that, keep his attention on me until the squirrel or critter went away. And that worked for years. I had total control of Big Louie. Till one day, we're out walking, and his harness is on him, and we're walking down the sidewalk, and from the minute we get outside, he's sniffing the air, sniffing the air. I hadn't seen that before, didn't know what it was about. We go around the corner, there are 3 bear cubs, like a few feet from us. So I jump on Big Louie, I wrestle him down to the ground. The bear cubs run away. Louie drags me across the pavement. I mean, I'm scraped up, I'm bleeding and all. So I drag him back home, I clean myself up, and I no longer walk Big Louie. But I do miss him. So every so often I call his, you can't say dog owners anywhere, you gotta say pet people. I call his pet people, pet parents, and arrange for a play date in his yard. So I still get to see Big Louie. And then the third catastrophe, we'll call it what it is Maria. Maria also lived in North Asheville. She had 3 cats. And I went to visit, again, get my instructions, get my key and everything. And she tells me Pablo is a feral cat that she had just lured into the house a few weeks before. He didn't want any part of people. He just hid under the bed. And I was to keep the bedroom door closed. And I'd just go in, leave his food, scoop his litter, and not even see Pablo. Then there was Billy, who was really old, and most of his fur was missing. You could see his ribs protruding. And I had to liquefy Billy's food because he couldn't even chew. I don't think he had teeth anywhere, he couldn't even chew. And Maria left me a permission to euthanize note for the week she was gone because she told me Billy had cancer and may not live the week. The third cat was a kitten called Mr. Wiggles, this ragdoll kitten, lots of fur, lovely, high energy. When I first went to meet them all, Maria had a laser pointer, and Mr. Wiggles was chasing the laser pointer all over the house, trying to run up the walls. So she goes away on her trip, and I go each day to take care of these cats. Well, as soon as I arrive, Mr. Wiggles meets me at the door. Oh, hi, you're here, let's play. I don't see Pablo at all, and I liquefy Billy's food and watch him slurp it down and then go to sleep. So it's the last day of my visit. I'm like, oh, thank God that Billy stayed alive. I didn't have to have this cat euthanized, or he didn't die on my care. So I'm getting ready to leave the house, but I sit down on the floor one last time and coax Mr. Wiggles into my lap, and I'm patting him and playing with him and all. And all of a sudden, he starts coughing. He's coughing. Then he's like gasping for breath. Then he has a seizure. His limbs are out straight and trembling. He falls over dead on the floor. Oh my God, I'm beside myself. What do I do? I go to the bathroom, and she had these turquoise towels. I get a turquoise towel. I put Mr. Wiggles in it. I wrap him real tight, take him out to the trunk of my car, put it in, and I drive home really slowly so he doesn't roll around back there. I get home, I compose myself, and I call Maria. I'm like, oh, Maria, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Mr. Wiggles just died in my lap just now. Billy lived, but Mr. Wiggles just died. I don't know what happened. I'm sobbing. I'm all upset. There's silence. And then I hear, oh, Cindy, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Bless your heart. Would you do me a favor? Would you put Mr. Wiggles in the freezer for me? When I come home, I want to have a little service with my friends and bury him under the maple tree in the backyard. Okay, sure, I say, sure. Hang up the phone, I turn to Chuck, and I say, Chuck, I can't do it. Can you do it? Can you come with me and do it? Now here's Chuck, who, not so much anymore, but back then hated my pet care business, hated I had a pet care business, was embarrassed that I used to be a professor and now I pick up dog crap for a living. And I say, please help me. And like any good husband, he goes, yes, dear. So we drive back to Maria's house. He's driving, again, really slow, so Mr. Wiggles is not rolling around back there. He takes him out. We go into the kitchen. He takes him out of the turquoise towel, and he's ready to put him in the freezer. And I'm like, no, stop, no. You got to put him in so it looks like he's resting peacefully. You got to put his head on his paws. Got to wrap his tail around him, that classic sleeping cat pose. So he does that, and he puts Mr. Wiggles in the freezer between the frozen blueberries and the green peas. So I love doing this. I have great joy. I probably shouldn't be telling these stories because there are a few, I think, of my pet care clients here tonight. I swear I won't kill or lose your pet, But I love it. I've cared for horses, chickens, hamsters, iguana, parrots, goldfish. I'll care for anything except snakes.
Yeah.
And so I very much appreciate your hearing the confession of this crazy pet lover. Thank you.
That was great.
Folks, I have to have a confession here. Cindy and I just came back from a 40-hour failed plane trip from Montreal that ended up in a bus ride to Boston and a flight back to Charlotte. So in 40 hours, we've had exactly 4 hours of sleep. But I'm not here to whine. I'm here to introduce someone who I consider to be a great, great friend. I met Wallace Bohannon about, I guess it's been maybe 2 years. And Wallace and I are in a men's group together, and there's another fellow back there hiding out because he doesn't want to be associated with us. Hi, Steve. And our next teller is a phenomenal person as well as a teller. His personal history is amazing. Wallace Bohannon grew up in Brooklyn, New York. If you've ever seen the movie The Heights, that's kind of the life that Wallace had. His father was a Cub master and a Boy Scout leader. Wallace was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout. And then he tried to avoid what we call the Vietnam War, which back then was also called the Indochina War, by enlisting so that he wouldn't have to go to Nam. It didn't work out that way, and he ended up going to Nam, and that's a whole other story. But he came back, and he faced racism like he had never experienced before. So what do? If you go to the African American Museum at the Smithsonian, the first thing you see is you'll see a man with his fist up as a Black Panther. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you a man that went from Black Panther to Buddhist to the most wonderful, caring, thoughtful human being I've gotten to know over the last few years. My friend and soon to be yours, Wallace Bohannon.